Welcome to Insights for Manufacturing, the podcast that supports the UK manufacturing sector. Hosted by Jeff Beecham, the Manufacturers Recruiter. Hello and welcome to Insights for Manufacturing. Today we're focusing on employment law, and I'm delighted to welcome my special guest today, Richard Hiron, who is an employment law and HR solicitor. Welcome to the show, Richard. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Now, clearly, there's a good connection between your world in terms of employment law and mine in terms of recruitment. It's not a subject matter that I go into too much detail on. That's why we have experts like you around. But I thought the discussion that we're going to have today is going to be relevant to both business owners, business leaders, and individuals. So keen to find out about the world of employment law and your part in it. So kicking off then, what are the current biggest risks to businesses around employment law, Richard?
Sure. I think the first and foremost, is getting people in the first place. So we've seen all of these things over the tail end of 2022 into this year, where you have strikes, you have people very disillusioned with the workplace. And it's kind of like a tug of war at the moment, where the employees and the trade unions are saying that it's an employees market, and business are saying that it is very much, they're in control. But I don't think either one of them at the moment is really winning. I think it's kind of, we're on a balance at the moment of who is going to blink first. So something that is probably going to be of great interest to any kind of employer, but manufacturing is not going to be any different. It's about making your workplace very attractive for people to come in and, hopefully have an entire career with you. So that doesn't necessarily mean massive salaries. It can mean things like who you work with in the community, what you give back, and also benefits that you can give to your staff, gym memberships, days off for their birthday. I mean, we have a younger workforce coming in. We always have a younger workforce coming in, but they seem to want different things every time.
Yeah.
And this one is much more socially aware. So the environment is a big one, as we've all seen, with the cost of living, energy, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Anything that you can do to show that you are a caring, respectable employer, that you respect them, you respect other people, is likely going to kind of stand in your stead to attract the best candidates to you. The next one is more of a boring legal point. So we're still feeling the after effects of Brexit. There is going to be what is called a sunset of retained European Union law. So since we actually had Brexit, we've been surviving on a kind of inherited EU law that is British law. But that's going to change this year. So we are completely in the dark about what is going to remain, what is going to leave. It's kind of like Brexit all over again. But, things like unfair dismissal, transfer of undertakings, which is probably better known as 2P, working time regulations, all of those things that you and I have known as just a given are all potentially up for grabs. They might be going. From a personal perspective, there was a suggestion in Parliament recently that the review of all of these laws and what will be going, what will be staying, would hopefully be extended to 2026, but unfortunately that was declined. So we're going to have 2023. We're going to see a lot of laws, not just in employment law, but across the board, either staying or going. And all I can really say about that is keep an eye on the news, because the thing with all of that is we can potentially feel in the first instance that, hey, all of this regulation is going out the door. But actually, a lot of that regulation contributes to an employer's workplace culture.
Sure.
So people worried about being dismissed. If suddenly unfair dismissal rights went out the door, then you'd probably have a very unhappy workforce thinking, I could be dismissed for any reason at any time whatsoever.
Yeah.
And thinking about it in that context, I mean, well, nobody likes to be on the knife edge. So I think the point that I'm trying to make really is that it's a very uncertain time. It is going to be, I think, equally as uncertain as the furlough situation, as Brexit itself. It's going to be our next major challenge. So it's worth keeping an eye out for.
Yeah. And I was just listening to you there. I've got sort of visions of, businesses large and small, with their in-house, either, if they've got a legal team or, certainly the HR communities within businesses, must be having potential nightmares at the moment, because it's not just the changes, is it? It's because there's a whole, whatever the changes are, whether companies like them or not, whether employees like them or not, there's that whole communication piece. There's potentially employee handbooks that need changing. There's you've got to get all this information out. It's got to be digestible for your workforce. People have got to understand what it is and what the impacts are to them. So that's going to suck up a whole load of resource, isn't it, for businesses? Whereas, if just for example, Brexit hadn't have happened, if we hadn't needed to go through this period of change, laws don't get changed that often, certainly in terms of employment law, not major ones anyway. And a lot of businesses will probably be thinking, crikey, how are we going to cope with all of this? We're stretched as it is. We haven't got a great deal of additional budget to bring additional people in. So it is going to have a bit of a burden on organizations, isn't it? And like you say, from an individual perspective, there could be people working in businesses that are going to be a little bit fearful about their future, because processes and rules might change. So really important point. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
So talking about UK manufacturing specifically, how, in your opinion, could UK manufacturers work more proactively to avoid legal non-compliance? I know that's quite a wide topic there, but what are your thoughts on that in terms of them being a little bit more proactive rather than reacting to things when it's too late?
Of course. I think one of the best pieces of advice for any employer, but manufacturers, it works equally well for them, is start from the foundation. Don't run before you can walk. So the thing that I'm going to reference in particular are contracts of employment and staff handbooks.
Yeah.
They are often seen as a complete nightmare. You have to do them, you have to give them to people by day one or before of them actually starting work, and let's just get it done, get it out of our hair. But the thing with contracts of employment and staff handbooks is that when they are drafted properly, they can really reflect your business. They can cut some of those awkward situations in the bud and answer the questions that people just ask day by day. Of course, you're bound to find people who will ask a question whether it's written down or not.
Yeah.
But people are very intelligent creatures. If they think that it's covered in their staff handbook, if it's in their contract of employment, they will read that. And the process that you set down can actually help you to guide them to reduce the number of problems in your workplace on a day-by-day basis, save you management time, save you money, and get everything working like a well-oiled machine. So it's well worth investing in those from the very beginning.
Yeah. And that sort of ties in with something you said earlier around the whole hiring and staff retention piece. If you've got most companies will have a set of values, mission statement, and all the rest of it. But I think the employee handbooks and contracts, that I see them. Yes, it's a legal thing. You have to have them, but looking at it from a slightly different perspective, these documents could also be be seen as it's a great marketing tool for the culture of the business, as you say, because a lot of companies will struggle to get in the right sort of talent. But trying to become an employer of choice, if you've got really good values and you're living and breathing them throughout the organization, it's being driven from the top of the board right through to the team members on the shop floor. These documents are, it's written evidence about your procedures, about benefits, about it's not, a lot of people see them as a, make sure you don't do this, otherwise this might happen. That they are seen a little bit of a sort of policeman, or sort of deterrent to stepping outside of the guidelines. But it's not really like it. At the end of the day, working for an organization, it is a part. It's a relationship between two parties, and to have that written down, documented clearly. But it does give that. I think it gives a very clear representation of the company's values. And if there are really interesting benefits, people should be shouting about them a lot more. A lot of people get a job and they look at their contracts. If they're happy, they sign it and then they start the business. And if I was a betting man, I'd probably say 90% of people would not ever look at their contract again unless they've got a problem or they're looking to leave, and check what the notice period is. How many people revert back to their employee handbook more than once a year, if at all, after they've done a quick scan when they get their onboarding pack through the post? So they're really important documents, and they're good to refer back to, aren't they, from time to time?
Absolutely. I have questions, just silly little questions, come in from employers all the time, particularly their senior managers, saying things like, we've received a grievance, what do we do? And the truth is, the answer is in the staff handbook. But if they've never read it, if they never know where it's being stored, then naturally they're calling me rather than just following the process that's set out in black and white for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk for a minute about the as I call it, the collaboration between HR and people like yourself, employment law solicitors. I mean, HR and employment law specialists, really they should be the best of friends, but that's not always the case. Why do you think that is? What are the sort of challenges around that sort of dynamic and around that relationship?
That's an interesting one. I think it's to do with our skill set. And I think I should lead in by saying that there are a number of employment law solicitors who have switched sides, if you like, to human resources. I myself did it very briefly.
Yep.
And even though it was such a holistic, I wouldn't say therapeutic, a learning experience, it was kind of like I had taken my skills and I put them into somebody else's head. And I pulled those back with me because I wanted to retain my qualification as an employment law solicitor. Who wouldn't, after all of that hard work? And I found that I brought my human resources head with me. So I think one of the struggles is HR, whether they are in-house or external, they want very practical advice, and they want to give very practical advice. And they and their clients always want it to be that beautiful buzzword, commercial. Now, who can say what commercial is, really? I think it's probably money saving, but I might be wrong. The thing with lawyers is that we are very process driven. And if you don't tick a box, we can become very concerned that you will fall foul of problems in an employment tribunal.
Okay.
But I think my greatest advice to employment law solicitors and HR people who are listening is, if you get an opportunity to stand in the other's shoes, even if it's just shadowing them for a day or building those vital connections, having that opportunity to see something from somebody else's perspective is so invaluable. Because for me, I've found since then, my advice has been far less rigid. It's more fluid because you can bend the rules without breaking them.
Yeah.
But it's just knowing how far you can test a point before you have to say this far and no further.
Yeah, because I suppose there's you've got your specific skill set. HR have got theirs. There is that sort of middle ground. There's a little bit of overlap in there, and like you say, if some people have had a little bit of previous experience in both camps, then that's a win-win for everybody, isn't it? But that sort of middle ground where good HR professionals would have a good basic understanding of employment law. They have to, and if there was anybody in a business, I guess, that would be more inclined to focus on their own professional development and keep on top of changes in legislation, HR are going to be all over that. But I suppose you do get that situation where where do you draw the line? Where does an HR professional make that decision as to I sort of know what's the best, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know because I don't work in HR, but I suppose you're going to get individuals that are very, very risk adverse, and they would always pick up the phone or drop an email, even if they're 1% uncertain on something. Then you get others that sort of assess it, do a quick risk assessment in their own mind, and think, yeah, I think we're okay. It would be remiss of me to say, the smaller businesses may be at more risk of going in the wrong direction in that scenario, because they don't generally have big teams. They probably, a lot of small businesses certainly don't have a legal counsel, legal teams, and all the rest of it. So, the onus is on, the HR manager or HR director to be absolutely clear as to what their knowledge and capability is at that time for that certain topic, and knowing when to reach out to people like you. The sake of an email, the sake of a phone call or a meeting, it could actually save hundreds, thousands, millions of pounds. It's an interesting dynamic. I'd love to be a not necessarily a fly on the wall, but I'd love to walk in HR shoes for a day. I think on things like this, because I think everybody should be a little bit more aware of the ramifications of the laws that we have to abide by in business, really. So,
Yeah.
as well as supporting businesses and organizations themselves, I know you also help individual employees. What types of challenges do you support employees with? I mean, are there typical scenarios that pop up more often than others? I mean, what do you normally hit with from week to week on the employee side?
Sure. The thing with employees is something has usually gone wrong, or there's an effort to avoid something going wrong.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is settlement agreements. So that is essentially where an employer has offered a member of staff an agreement to waive any kind of claims that they might have. It might also result in their employment ending.
Yeah.
But a key part of that is that that person has to come and see a person like me for advice for it all to be legal.
Yeah.
And so we sit down, we have a chat about everything that's happened and the implications of it, and also any kind of compensation that might be related to that. And then we get it signed off. We ask for amendments if we need them before we sign. But typically, I'd say any amendments are quite minor. So that's pretty much the big one with employees. The second one that I see often is tribunal claims.
Right. Okay.
I do tribunal claims, but they're not my passion area. My passion area is actually building a situation up. So, say that an employee has a disciplinary or a grievance, and they are trying to proceed through that process in the best possible way. I see so many mistakes being made by both sides, admittedly, during that process.
Mm.
And to simply be there sooner to help the employee out, to say, okay, they're doing this, let's take this step to protect you, to put you in a stronger position in a tribunal, is part of what I like doing, because
Okay.
it means that if there's a tribunal claim, that person is then not sat in front of a judge who is telling them, you didn't do X, Y, and Z, so I am going to knock ABC off of your compensation. Similarly, by becoming involved in the situation far sooner, we can avoid the tribunal altogether
Yeah.
if the other side will negotiate over that settlement. And then it just saves so much time, stress, and money
Yeah.
for everyone involved, especially the employee.
So get in early if you've got any challenges or queries or inclination that it's going to go, anything's going to go legal, is get some advice early doors, and make sure that you've got all bases covered, really. And I like what you said about it does save time, it does save resource. I suppose there's also the psychological impact of, people don't really, does anybody really want to end up in court in a tribunal? What effect does that have on the business? They could get bad press from it. It affects morale in the boardroom and in leadership teams. The employee, could be going through, I don't know, I haven't been through an employment tribunal, myself, but the stress that an individual would go through that process in court, could have a real, even if they end up staying with the business, that might have a real damaging effect on their mental health, their outlook, their morale. It's probably best that everybody gets things sorted out where they can. It's not always possible, but sorted out early. And as you say, that the bottom line is it saves money. That's not the most important thing, but in the environment that we're all living in at the moment, businesses certainly don't want to be putting themselves at risk. A court case could wipe out the profits completely of a small business. And again, the negative impacts in the wider business community. If you've got an organization who's part of a group, you've got other companies within a group, they're wondering what's going on over at their sister company. It's all bad, it's just really negative. So rather than taking that view of, oh crikey, might have to speak to an employment law solicitor, how much is that going to cost, crikey, and that must be what goes through people's minds. It would me, because any type of professional service like that, solicitors, accountancy, anything like that, you have a specific set of skills and you're worth your weight in gold. But for the individuals and the businesses, yes, they get value out of that, but it's still, it's a cost that could be avoided. I think it's the most important thing.
I imagine that it is probably seen as akin to going to see a dentist, but we try and remove the jagged things going into your mouth where we can.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I had a flashback of Marathon Man then with Dustin Hoffman.
Is it safe?
Is it
Yeah.
safe? That's right. And if you're not sure, speak to an employment solicitor. Okay, so you've advised across different sectors, Richard, but from a manufacturing and engineering perspective, what's been your most challenging or rewarding mandate today? Is there something specific you could share with us without sort of breaking any confidentiality agreements?
Sure, of course. I'll keep it quite vague, but still try to explain it.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
a few years ago, I was working with a packaging company in North Hampshire, and they had not had their contracts reviewed in quite some time.
Mm.
They had 20 plus employees who were going to be affected by contractual changes. And their focus, understandably, was on purely getting the contract in place.
Okay.
The advice and I'm going to reference P&O ferries and everything that happened there, was that because they had more than 20 employees who were going to be affected by this, they had to consult with those employees.
Yeah.
And I can understand it. For a business owner, it must be crushing to think, all I've got to do is get this contract in place and I can roll it out to my staff, to then be told that you have to elect representatives or get a trade union in
Yeah.
and discuss it all with them. I can understand that. The flip side to it, and I was very fortunate because the business owner was very self-aware. He was not one of those people who tried to look on Google and pull loads of different clauses together to get this contract that probably looked like a cake that had exploded. He was very self-aware. He knew he couldn't do it by himself, and he wanted something that really reflected the interests of the business and how it worked. So he wanted to get everything done appropriately. It wasn't particularly what he wanted to hear, this advice. But I think the really important thing was he understood that by getting this process done properly, he had in his pocket what I would call the Cinderella moment. So you've got that part at the end of Cinderella, whether it's the book or Disney or whatever, where the glass slipper has smashed and I forget who he is, the Duke or whatever, is in complete hysterics. And then Cinderella just pulls this other glass slipper out of her pocket and says, but I've got the other slipper, which proves that she was the woman who went with Prince Charming or whoever to the ball. It's very similar to that kind of situation, which is why I call it the Cinderella moment, where if you've negotiated a contract or at least consulted over a contract with your staff, and then at some point in the future, somebody says, well, I didn't agree to that. You then have this brilliant situation where you can prove not only with the written contract, but with proof of the consultation that everything was done and that they agreed to it. So that probably explains why I call it the Cinderella moment, but it also explains why it's a massive benefit to business owners as well.
Absolutely. And you know, it's important, and it protects both parties, doesn't it? It's, you know, I suppose some employees would feel that, you know, a lot of the laws and regulations, they're there to protect the employers. But, you know, getting great advice, great legal advice, getting contracts sorted out properly between the two parties, it's for everybody's benefit. You know, circumstances can dictate opinion on who might be benefiting most from a set of rules or actions that have gone on, and then it all goes into dispute or what have you. But, you know, to get them sorted out properly, it's in everybody's best interest, isn't it?
Yeah. And you've also picked up on a very interesting point where employees think that employment law benefits employers. Employers think that employment law benefits employees. So we've touched on it before. It's one of the fascinating things with employment law is that perspective. And once you actually start to dive further into the other side's perspective, you not only get a better understanding of them and what they're going through, but if things do get very argumentative, you can then dip into that understanding to think, what would I do next? Okay, this is what I have to plan for. So it's brilliant. There's so much psychology in employment law.
Absolutely. So from your experience of working with both employers and employees, and I suppose often you've got to unpick complex and you know, highly sensitive events after they've happened. Are businesses providing enough training, do you think, for their staff, managers and leaders? I don't mean training on legal stuff, but, you know, you can get disputes over anything in a business, but how much of a risk is the scenario where, you know, there's a bit of grey area in some part of training, or it might even be on an induction, it might be on, I don't know, a health and safety or a fire safety exercise or training or something. You know, all of these things need to be absolutely nailed down, don't they? Do you think they're? Do you think employees are provided, and I suppose they are in the main. Otherwise, we'd be hearing about all this sort of thing every day in the news. But our business is providing enough from what you're seeing in your legal work. Are they providing enough training for their staff, their managers, and then the leaders? Because quite often in organisations, something will go on. You'll have a set of circumstances. You'll have the party who's done whatever it is that the business don't agree with. The manager of that person or persons will have their view and either know or not know how to go about dealing with that. But then the leaders or the directors, the owner of the business, might have a totally different view of that. They might have different, they might have a different approach to how they deal with it. And it's not just about training people in their job and the company procedures. I think it's really important that leaders are also trained and coached in how to deal with certain scenarios, and HR are a vital link in this, and obviously external coaches and mentors. But is there do you see a bit of a disconnect from the cases that you deal with in terms of our companies leaving themselves a little bit open in how they deal with stuff?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think in terms of training, it's one of those things that is often seen as once and done.
Yeah.
Actually, it makes me think a bit of, not with any kind of stigma attached, it makes me think a bit of George Lazenby in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Okay.
You do it once and then you don't come back to it at all. Whereas training is an ongoing exercise. Your business is kind of like, how shall I say, it's like an infant growing to a child, growing to a teenager, growing to an adult. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And so what happens in the business, how it's communicated, will evolve alongside that. And if you're not telling people, if you're cutting them out of the loop, whether they are in senior leadership or a manager lower down the scale or a member of staff below that, if they don't know what's going on, they are going to feel that disconnect. They are going to feel, well, to give an example, somebody does something that they do every day, and then suddenly it changes, but they haven't been told.
Sure.
Well, they are not going to feel very happy if they're then told you're not meant to be doing that, if they've never been told that before. So I think one of the things to combat that is, when it comes to dealing with those kinds of situations, to have a kind of self-awareness training for business owners, senior leadership, for them to, let's say, just cool things down when things become aggravated.
Yeah.
So one of the examples that I see very often, being a lawyer and the fact that we rely so much on written evidence, is you will see an email where things have gone from being okay to very incendiary. And often, yes, it can be an employee who starts that off, or it can be a senior leader. Whoever starts it off, it can be very helpful for a senior leader or a business owner to be able to see that email that is, let's just say, slagging them off.
Yeah.
And to respond in a very self-aware way, because an employment tribunal will look at that and think, okay, this person is just being a nuisance. They're not seeing how they are impacting this situation. Whereas this senior leader stroke business owner is responding in a very reasonable manner. It's clear who the problem is here.
Yeah.
So, and that does affect anything like compensation, whether you've done anything wrong or you've done everything right. So it's well worth investing in that, because it saves money in the long run, and it makes a happier workplace, because even if you do have somebody who's pushing your buttons, you have the safety net of being able to go to your senior leadership team and say, this is happening. Do you think I'm doing the right thing?
Yeah. And that brings me on to, I mean, I bang on about culture all the time, but emotional intelligence. If the entire workforce and leadership all had impeccable emotional intelligence, probably you would you wouldn't be doing the work that you do. But it's so important for leaders to have that self awareness, and emotional intelligence, empathy, are skills that a lot of people say, oh, they're soft skills. We're more interested in profits, we're more interested in acquisitions, or gaining more market share. The moment you start neglecting your employees by not listening, by not having that empathy, it can open up a whole can of worms. And I love what you said about it's mitigating risks of things blowing out of proportion, isn't it? And you get a snotty email. Do you react to it straight away? I suppose a good leader wouldn't react to it for a while. They'd probably blow off steam offline and take a measured approach to it. I think we've all had some sort of experience of that, either on one end of that or the other. So yeah, that's a really good point.
For it can be very beneficial. I find it myself, actually. If I receive that kind of email, I draft the response that I want to send, then
Yeah.
I stop. I go and get something to drink. I come back to it. And often I'm sat here laughing at the response that I want to send because I've just completely cooled down, and
Yes.
I put it in a much more reasonable way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's I think yeah, it's a good process to go through, isn't it? You have to get the information. You have to really do that brain dump of how you're feeling at the time, because sometimes if you don't do that immediately, obviously don't press send. But if you don't do
Yeah.
that, sometimes the email that you do end up sending might be missing out on something that is actually quite key. What are your plans for the rest of this year then, Richard?
Yeah, sure. So, I work with two firms. One is called Satford Solicitors. The other is Woodstock Legal Services in Poole,
Okay.
in Dorset. And myself and Woodstock, over the course of probably the last 6 months, have been developing a collaborative package, if you like, where we can work alongside HR professionals, not to put them in their place. It is very much a collaboration
Yeah.
where they can come to us as and when they need to get advice and documents to help them on their way. And it is really exciting because we're already, before formally launching it, bringing people on board who, on both sides, we know, like, and trust. So it's
Good.
reciprocal. And it's amazing. It is that collaboration between HR and employment law that you speak about. So that's the big plan. And
Brilliant.
other than that, it's very much about getting out, educating, and for both sides, whether it's an employer or an employee, avoiding the tribunal by doing the sensible things first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so much good work to be done. Prevention is better than the cure, I think. So that go back to that word you used, I love it. It's collaboration. I love collaboration myself. So it's all about taking a proactive approach, knowing who the right people are to talk to, and building relationships. So, well, Richard, it's been a pleasure to understand a little bit more about the legal world in terms of employment today. Thank you very much for coming on the show. We will have another chat in due course, no doubt, because we have some shared interests in terms of film and things like that you're pretty well known for on LinkedIn. So just moving on to that, where can people find out more about you?
Of course. Well, if you look for me as either Richard Hiron or the Hironator, which is my, I guess, my nom de plume, if you like. So that's you can basically find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and on Instagram.
Okay.
And all of those sources, you will find stuff about what I've been watching, and also employment law, and hopefully how the two of them are actually quite interesting topics that interrelate.
Absolutely, and that's how you and I first came into contact, was through your posts around movies linked in with employment law. It caught my eye, and I've been following you ever since. So okay, well, thanks again for your insights today. It's been a great chat. That wraps up today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. I'm sure the audience will as well. Thanks to Richard Hiron, the Hironator. Thank you for listening, and look out for the next episode of Insights for Manufacturing. See you next time, and bye-bye.